The train gave no warning before it vanished. No cry, no farewell whistle. Just the long sigh of steam and a rattle that dwindled into the morning dust. Jean stood alone on the cracked wooden platform, her gloved hand still raised in greeting, now stilled mid-air like a forgotten prayer. The wind tugged at the hem of her blue traveling dress, worn thin at the edges. It smelled of soot and frost and old wood, the scent of rail stations and restless journeys. Beside her sat a battered leather suitcase, its brass latch rusted with age and use. Inside, carefully folded, was a cream-colored lace shawl, 3 letters from her mother, and a ring that had never warmed her hand. Jean Whitmore, for now still Whitmore, had come west by arrangement. A marriage arranged through ink and paper, hope and promise. A man named Jameson Bell, a widower, a farmer, a man in need of company and care. He had written kind enough words. Said he liked women who read scripture. Said her handwriting looked neat and pure. Said he'd be waiting for her with a wagon and a rose if the winter hadn't killed them all first. But there was no wagon, no rose, no man, only a folded slip of paper tucked under a weighty stone on the platform bench, weighted down as though the guilt of it might otherwise blow away. Apologies. Change my mind. Don't come looking. J. It wasn't even folded neat. No name, no welcome. Just a closing door, made of 6 words and the wind. She didn't cry. Jean was past crying. Had spent her last tears somewhere around Missouri when a conductor slapped a hand too close to her back and called it helping her aboard. She'd walked through this decision like someone crossing a frozen lake. Slow, careful, eyes down, too far in to turn around. But this was not a crack. This was a plunge. Behind her, the station agent coughed. "Ma'am," he said, voice gravel-dry, "you can't stay here." She turned. He was small, bent like a hook, chewing a matchstick like it might offer wisdom. He didn't meet her eyes. "There an inn nearby?" she asked. He spit the stick out. "One. Full up. Supply wagon broke a wheel. Teamsters camped in all the beds. No rooms for stray women." Jean flinched at the word. Not the insult, but the truth of it. "Maybe someone's got a spare floor," she offered, still polite, still trying. "I can cook. Clean. I don't take much." The man shrugged. "Town ain't fond of charity cases, nor of women showing up without husbands." She swallowed hard. "I have a husband." "You sure?" He nodded toward the crumpled note. She didn't answer, just bent, picked up her suitcase, and walked to the far end of the platform. The last plank creaked under her boot. Children watched her from behind a fence. One girl, no older than 10, held a doll with a missing face and stared without blinking. Jean managed a small wave. The girl didn't wave back, just mouthed something that Jean couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "You don't belong here." The afternoon passed slowly. The sun rose overhead, then leaned west, dragging its shadow behind the station like a dog too tired to follow. No one spoke to her. A few passed by, glancing once before turning away. A man in a black coat asked if she was working, then frowned when she said no and called her a fool. When hunger crept in, sharp and thin, she tore a corner from one of her mother's letters and chewed on the paper. It tasted of ink and dust. Near sunset, an old woman shuffled by, her skirt patched with 6 kinds of cloth and dignity. She looked Jean up and down, then unwrapped a heel of cornbread from her apron pocket. "Eat," she said. Jean hesitated, then took it, nodding. "Thank you." "You sleep behind the crates, behind the platform. Watch your back. It's not wolves you worry about. It's men." Jean didn't ask her name. The woman didn't ask hers. That night, cold wrapped her like a second skin. She wedged herself behind the crates the woman had pointed out, suitcase under her head like a pillow, the platform above creaking with the night wind. She tried to pray, but the words came cracked and out of order. The stars blinked down like distant eyes, too far to help, too old to care. Somewhere a coyote howled. She closed her eyes, tighter than she needed, and tried to dream of Nebraska Springs and the smell of lilacs, of her father's stories, of the way her mother would hum when she stitched. But memory was thin protection. Sleep came in fits, torn and uneven. She startled once when footsteps crunched too near, breath held tight in her throat, but they passed. Morning, when it finally arrived, came pale and unsure. Frost had kissed the wooden crates. Her breath showed when she sighed. Jean stood stiffly, her back aching, her fingers red. She shook out her dress, patted down her hair, and pretended that she had somewhere to be. Somewhere warm, with a kettle on the stove and a name on the door. But she didn't. Not anymore. She walked down the road leading out of town, not because it led anywhere, but because it didn't stay. Her boots sank in the mud. Birds scattered as she passed. The world didn't notice. And then a single sound broke the morning. Hoofbeats. Slow. Heavy. She turned. From the ridge, a figure on horseback emerged. A man wrapped in furs and shadow, face shaded by the rising sun. He didn't wear blue or gray or black like the others. His coat was earth-colored, stitched with old patterns. His horse moved with a quiet surety of something that had walked these lands longer than memory. He didn't ride fast, didn't ride straight, just curved gently along the slope like he was following something older than roads, maybe wind, maybe instinct. And then he saw her, and did not look away. Their eyes met across distance, and in that moment, Jean felt something shift inside her. Not a jolt, not a pull, but the soft rearranging of something forgotten. Like the sound of water after a long silence. Like the sky remembering how to snow. She didn't wave. He didn't nod. But the horse slowed. And she waited. Jean walked until her legs forgot why they ached. The landscape unrolled before her like a quilt stitched in ochres and grays, dry scrub, distant cottonwoods, the outline of far hills trembling in the morning light. The wind was gentler here, but it still had teeth. She kept moving, not because she had somewhere to reach, but because stopping felt like surrender. By noon her hands had gone numb. By dusk, her feet were soaked from a frozen creek she had crossed barefoot, boots tied to save their soles. She wasn't thinking of survival. She wasn't thinking at all. Just walking, one breath after another, as if each step might carry her out of shame, out of abandonment, out of herself. It was the dark that stopped her, not the sky dark, that came soft, indigo and layered with low stars, but the darker thing inside, that hollow behind the ribs when the body is too cold, too tired, too afraid to keep pretending. She fell in a thicket of pinyon trees, her legs folding like paper. The suitcase had been abandoned miles ago, near a split rock shaped like a sleeping dog. Her dress was torn at the hem. Her lips cracked. She closed her eyes and curled into herself, trying to make her body smaller than the night. She did not hear the hoofbeats. She did not hear the man dismount. She only felt the warmth before she understood its source. When she opened her eyes, there was fire. It crackled quietly, a small thing, fed with care, dry sticks, slow flame. Beside it sat a man, still a stone. His face caught the flicker like carved cedar. Skin the color of red clay after rain. Hair dark and tied back with a leather cord. No rifle across his lap. No threat in his posture. Just silence and presence. He did not speak. He did not gesture. He simply poured water from a pouch into a pot and set it over the fire. From a woven bag, he drew out strips of something that smelled earthy and rich, not meat, but root, maybe, and let them sink into the simmer. Jean sat up slowly, afraid to startle him or the moment. He did not turn his head, but he said after a long breath, in a voice low as riverbed stone, "You should drink. Not now, but when ready." His English was careful, shaped by thought. Not stiff, but deliberate. Every word held its place. She did not answer. The steam from the pot drifted between them. Her heart beat against her ribs like a fist wanting out. She watched him without moving. The fire threw his shadow long behind him into the trees. He wore a coat of many seams hand-stitched. His boots were soft-soled and quiet. A feather hung from one wrist, braided into leather. Nothing about him said harm. But then again, neither had the man who sent her west. Still, he made no move toward her. No attempt to question or soothe. He simply tended the fire, adjusted the pot, and waited, not for her to speak, but for the silence to settle. She found her voice an hour later, cracked and low. Why? He glanced at her, eyes steady. You were cold. It was not said like kindness. It was said like fact. Like sunrise. She nodded once. Her limbs were trembling now, the cold finally losing its grip. She crawled closer to the fire, cautious, wary of the heat that might betray her. But it welcomed her like something old. Her fingers twitched as feeling returned. He passed her a shallow wooden cup filled with the broth. She sniffed it. Earth, pine warmth. She drank. And for the first time in days, something inside her uncoiled. He did not ask her name, did not demand hers. They sat as if they were not strangers, but two things the wind had placed together for a night's mercy. The stars above blinked through the trees. Coyotes called, far off and thin. When she finally asked, "Do you live nearby?" he nodded. "Far enough," he said. "Not too far." He pointed toward the ridge, then added after a pause, "You may come. Or not. There is weather coming. You would not do well alone." He did not say it unkindly. She thought of saying no, thought of trying to prove some scrap of strength. But pride was a game for the warm. She simply nodded. He extinguished the fire with a careful sweep of sand. His horse waited in the shadows, calm and unshaken. He did not offer her the saddle. Instead, he walked beside her, reins in hand, the horse following like a quiet second shadow. She stumbled once, and he offered his arm. Not insistently, not like help, like invitation. She took it. The walk was not long, but long enough for the moon to climb higher, and the night to breathe a little deeper. His home was not a house, not in the way she'd known them. It was a shelter built into the land, low round, with walls of earth and timber. Smoke rose from a stone flue. Inside, warmth clung to the walls like moss. She stepped in hesitantly. It smelled of juniper and leather and roasted maize. A blanket was laid near the hearth. He gestured to it, said nothing. She lay down without asking questions. The fire whispered low, like an old story being told by breath. Before sleep came, she whispered into the quiet, "Jean." A pause. Then his voice. "Toyatsi." She didn't ask what it meant. Didn't need to. It settled into the room like a stone in water. Outside, the wind began to rise, sifting snow into the corners of the earth. Inside, she dreamed of hands that did not grab, eyes that did not measure, and the fire between them, the quiet kind, the saving kind, never went out. The days unfolded like parchment warmed by sun, slow, patient, creased with silence. The wind came gentler in that high place, threading between juniper and stone, lifting the scent of pine sap and sage. Jean awoke to bird song and slept to the hum of embers. The ache in her bones dulled. The taut thread of fear, once wrapped tight around her ribs, loosened. Toyatsi spoke rarely, but when he did, the words carried weight. Not heavy with sorrow, not anymore, but with clarity, like stones placed carefully in a riverbed to shape the current. His presence was steady, like weather, like seasons, like something the earth trusted. She helped where she could. At first, it was small things. Folding blankets, fetching water from the stream that curled like silver through the trees, learning which herbs to hang from the beams, which roots to boil, which would crack loud in fire, and which burned slow and blue. He never corrected her harshly. When she erred, he simply did it again beside her, hands slow, eyes kind. She watched how he moved, the way his fingers spoke with the earth, the way he tied rope with patience, shaped arrowheads with calm precision. He sang under his breath sometimes, in words she did not know, a low, rhythmic thread that wove between his tasks and stilled the air around them. In the mornings, she swept the earthen floor while sunlight made lace on the wall. In the evenings, she sat by the hearth, mending what could be mended, letting what could not remain undone. The ache of what had been, the station, the note, the emptiness, faded, though not entirely. Grief was still there, but it no longer dictated the shape of her days. One afternoon, she found him repairing a woven basket outside, knees in the dust, sunlight on his brow. "What does your name mean?" she asked. He looked up, not surprised by the question. "Toyatsi," he said. "It means little water." She tilted her head. "Because you're calm?" He smiled just slightly. Because I was born during a drought. She laughed. The sound startled her. It rose out of her like a bird escaping a cage. And mine, she asked quieter. What do you call me? He held her gaze, then looked toward the sky, where a hawk circled high above the cliffs. Atsa, he said. She frowned. What does that mean? Eagle. Jean shook her head. I'm no eagle. I'm not brave. He shrugged. Eagles do not call themselves brave. The name stayed with her. Not a name, exactly. Not yet. But a suggestion. A kindness spoken into the air that waited for her to grow into it. They did not speak of her husband, or the note, or the train. Not because he avoided it, but because he respected it. Her past was not a question to him, only a truth that would surface when it chose. One night, as wind curled around the shelter like a breathing thing, she spoke without prompting. He said I was too plain, that he'd imagined someone with finer hands, a prettier voice. Said I walked like a farm mule. Yahtzee didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, you walk like someone who has walked far. She blinked at the fire. I have. You are still walking, he said, eyes on the flames. Another silence. A good one. Not like the silences in her old life, the silences filled with disapproval, waiting for her to guess what she'd done wrong. This one held no trap. He passed her a bowl of stew. She took it, hands brushing for a breath too long. He didn't flinch. Jean began to hum sometimes as she worked. Old hymns, mostly, ones her mother used to sing while stitching by candlelight. Yahtzee listened, not interrupting. One morning, he hummed back, a tune unfamiliar, yet with the same rhythm. Something older, earth deep. She asked if he'd ever been married. He nodded once. Long ago. What happened? She returned to her people. Her place was not here. Jean didn't press. That was the difference. The choice not to push, not to dig up what had already been buried. They moved through days like two streams meeting, each keeping their shape, yet changing the other. One morning, she brought back a bundle of yarrow and wild onion. He looked up from where he was shaping a bough and nodded. You learn fast. I remember well, she said. That night, he carved by the firelight, slow strokes of a small blade across a piece of smooth bone. When he finished, he handed her a simple pendant on a cord of sinew. It was shaped like a feather, lines etched with care. For you. She traced the feather with her thumb. Is it for luck? It is a thing that flies, he said, but also lands. She wore it the next day, and the day after that. And when she caught her reflection in the creek, hair braided back, hands brown from sun and work, lips no longer trembling, she did not see a woman left behind. She saw someone finding the shape of herself again. One evening, the sky turned copper before storm. The air held weight, and the trees bent in anticipation. Jean stood in the doorway, arms folded. Do you ever miss it? She asked. He looked up from sharpening his knife. What? Before. Whatever came before this. He paused. Considered. No, he said. I missed nothing that asked me to be smaller than I am. The wind swept through the trees like a warning. Inside, the fire kept its calm. She looked at him, really looked, the quiet in him, the steadiness. Not absence of pain, but peace earned through walking with it. And she realized something. She was not waiting anymore. Not to be rescued. Not to be chosen. Not to be enough for someone who never saw her to begin with. She was, for the first time, simply living. And in that living, something new was beginning. Not loud, not sudden, but slow as spring thaw. Not love. Not yet. But a home maybe. A place where her name might be spoken not as a burden, but as belonging. The letter came folded into thirds, its edges curled and bruised with dust. It arrived by way of a trading rider, a sharp-eyed woman with sunburned hands and a leather satchel strapped tight across her back. Jean was gathering cedar shavings when the horse snorted near the ridge and the woman dismounted, offering only a nod before reaching into her pack and withdrawing the thin, faded envelope. Jean recognized the handwriting at once. Jameson Bell wrote like a man afraid of being misunderstood, long, curled letters packed too tightly together. as if the words might scatter if not pressed firm. Her hands turned colder than the wind as she took the envelope, her name staring up at her in blue ink that had begun to bleed from age or snow or guilt. She didn't open it right away. Yahtzee watched her from a short distance, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask, just handed her a blanket and walked back toward the shelter, leaving her alone with the paper and the weight it carried. She sat on a flat stone near the fire pit, boots tucked beneath her, and opened it slowly, each crease a whisper of the past she thought had already buried itself. Jean, I have thought of you more often than I will ever admit aloud. You must know I was not in my right mind when I left that note. Shame was part of it. Fear too. I'd built you up too high in my thoughts, and when I saw you weren't what I imagined, I fled. But I was wrong, and I know it now. The preacher here says we are given second chances. I hope that's true. I've been baptized anew. I own land now, a parcel of good dirt near Bentry, and I've built a proper home. Nothing fancy, but enough. If you still have the ring, put it on. Come to me, and we'll set things right. No hard feelings. We'll start over. Yours, Jameson Bell. There was no apology for the cold bench or the snow that nearly killed her. No acknowledgement of the dignity stripped when she became an orphaned wife without a wedding. Only the smoothness of ownership wrapped in scripture and confidence, as if his name could undo what had already been lived. She folded the letter once more and set it on her lap like a thing too fragile to touch, too poisonous to hold. Later that night, she did not eat. Yahtzee prepared stew, corn, and marrow and juniper smoke, but said nothing when she declined. He simply placed the bowl by the fire and returned to carving a handle from elk bone. The scrape of blade against was the only sound between them. When darkness stretched long and the fire danced smaller, she finally said his name. He looked up. I was promised to a man named Jameson. He changed his mind when he saw me. Yahtzee's hand stilled. He sent a letter today. Said he's ready now. Said I should come back and start over. He did not speak. The silence pressed, not in anger, but in something heavier, patience carved from respect. What would you do? She asked. He met her eyes. It is not my place. I'm asking you. He hesitated. Then I would ask, do you want to be chosen by someone who once left you behind? Her chest tightened. I thought I did, she whispered. I used to dream he'd come looking. Say it was a mistake. Say he missed me. She touched the pendant at her neck, the small carved feather, and thought of the quiet laughter, the soft footprints in the snow beside hers, the way her name sounded when no one demanded it be different. I don't want to be chosen anymore, she said. I want to choose. Yahtzee nodded once, slow. She left the letter by the fire that night, and just before dawn, she returned with a flint spark and set flame to its edge. It burned in silence, curling in on itself like a dead leaf in autumn. The smoke rose in thin ribbons, joining the gray sky above. When it was gone, she sat for a long time, watching the blackened flakes disappear in the breeze. Then she stood. She walked the ridge line as the morning broke, the land stretching wide before her, open, endless, honest. The wind tangled in her hair, no longer cruel. A hawk drifted high above, circling in patient spirals. She whispered into the wind, not a name, not yet, but a vow. When she returned to the shelter, Yahtzee was grinding herbs in a stone bowl. He glanced up, as always, without pressing. She stepped inside and picked up the spindle beside the fire. My name is Jean, she said, threading the wool carefully between her fingers. But you may call me Atsa. I think I'd like that. His smile was not wide, but it was warm, and it reached his eyes. That name suits you. She nodded. It does now. It was the wind that warned them, not with sound, but with its sudden stillness. A quiet too clean, too sharp. The kind that comes before the world holds its breath. Jean stood beside the drying rack, hanging strips of juniper bark. When she caught the scent, sharp, bitter, a memory of scorched fields and lightning-split trees. Smoke, distant but wrong. Not the clean scent of hearth fire or the sweet burn of sage. She turned, eyes lifting to the ridge. A coil of dark smoke rose like a question over the valley. Yahtzee appeared from the tree line, bow slung over one shoulder, small bundle of hunted birds in his hand. He looked once at the sky, and the slack in his face tightened. "It's the Miller homestead," he said. "Too far to be any other." Jean didn't ask how he knew. He didn't explain. They ran. The land passed beneath them in a blur of dust and urgency. Jean's breath came shallow. Her skirt tore against brush. The sun beat overhead, hard and indifferent. As they crested the final slope, the smoke thickened, not from brush, but from wood walls, dry hay, and oil-fed flame. The Miller cabin, a half-day's ride from their own shelter, was half swallowed by fire. Roof sagging, windows gone. A young woman sobbed near the well, dress blackened, hair unbound. A man, her husband, perhaps, paced uselessly with a burned hand cradled in a rag. And a scream cut through the haze, small and high and alive. "A child's inside," Jean gasped, not waiting for confirmation. Yahtzee grabbed her arm. "You can't." "She's still screaming," Jean said, eyes locked on the sagging doorway. "That means she's still breathing." The man with the burned hand shook his head. "The beam fell. We couldn't reach her." Yahtzee's eyes moved fast, fire, wind, structure, assessing, calculating. Jean already moved. He followed without hesitation. The heat hit like a wave, thick with pitch and ash. The entry was collapsing. Jean ducked low, cloth to her mouth. The girl's cries echoed from beyond a fallen table. Fire danced along the walls like a thing alive, laughing and spitting. She found the child beneath a quilt near the far wall, curled like a fawn, eyes wide, lips black with soot. "I've got you," Jean whispered, voice rasping as she lifted the girl. "Maybe 5, maybe 6, too light, too fragile." Behind her, wood groaned and cracked. "Yahtzee," she shouted, and he was there, already pulling aside debris, clearing the way. The beam overhead creaked like a dying tree. They didn't run. They moved as one, his hand steady on her back, hers around the girl's tiny chest. And they emerged into the smoke-thick light just as the roof gave its final cry and collapsed behind them. Outside, the woman screamed in relief. Jean handed the child over before falling to her knees, coughing, chest burning. Her forearms blistered, the skin angry with red welts. Yahtzee knelt beside her, checking for deeper wounds. She gripped his wrist. "She's all right," Jean croaked. "You are not," he said, voice low with restrained fear. "I'll mend," she replied. "We all will." They didn't stay long. Other riders were already galloping in from the ridgeline. Neighbors with buckets. The sheriff in a dust-streaked coat. One man knelt beside the father, checking his bandaged hand. The fire was dying now, its hunger spent, its damage done. The sheriff approached them slowly, hat in hand. "Folks said you two lived near the South Ridge. Never thought you'd come running so fast. Not many do." Jean looked up from her knees, soot streaked across her cheek. She was screaming. That's all that mattered. The sheriff nodded, looked at Yahtzee. "Your woman's brave." "She is not mine," he said simply. Then, gently, "She is herself." The sheriff blinked, unsure what to make of that, then tipped his hat and turned away. The ride home was quiet. The child's cry echoed in Jean's bones long after the smoke faded. Her arms throbbed, wrapped in cool cloth Yahtzee had soaked in stream water. But the ache wasn't sharp. It was clean, earned. When the shelter came into view, nestled in its curve of stone and shade, it looked the same. But something in her had shifted. The fire had taken something from them both, a layer of doubt, maybe, a last hesitation. Smoke had a way of clarifying what mattered. Yahtzee helped her to the sleeping mat and crouched beside her, hands poised like he meant to speak, then thought better of it. "Say it," she murmured. He met her gaze. "I was afraid for you." Jean reached for his wrist, the same one she'd clutched in the fire. "I was afraid too," she said. "But I was never alone." He brushed a loose strand of hair from her temple, fingers lingering. "I cannot give you land or a house with a porch. I have no name that holds power here." She smiled, eyes wet with something deeper than tears. "You gave me shelter when the world didn't want me. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. Outside, the wind shifted. The sky held no smoke now, only stars. He unfastened something from his belt, a carved bracelet of polished wood, etched with a line of small birds in flight. No ring, no claim, just an offering. I ask nothing of you, he said. But if you choose to stay, let this be the way I remember your answer. She held out her hand. He slipped the bracelet on. It fit like it had waited for her. I'm not yours, she whispered. But I belong here, with you. Not as property, as equal. He nodded, and they sat together in the dark, not as a woman once left behind and a man who found her, but as two who had walked through flame and chose, without promise or pressure, to walk forward side by side. Above them, the stars burned steady, and below, two hearts, once lost, once wary, beat in time, not to fear, but to the vow that needed no words.